All hands on deck, mateys, as this ship is about to set sail for one of the seven seas. Stand up, Vanguard! Hey Cardfighters, welcome back to the last set review of V-BT09 Butterfly the Moonlight. If you haven't catched any of our other set reviews that we did for Murakumo, Dark Regulars or Pale Moon, then I highly recommend you guys to check out one of these videos, links on top right here. And otherwise stick around, as in this video we're gonna dive into the depths of the seas with the new Granblue cards. In this set for Butterfly the Moonlight we've got a lot of interesting new cards for Granblue. First off, we've got a new archetype, or let's say a new archetype, as 7 Seas makes it back into the reboot. But we also got some amazing new generic support cards that are in the lines of the old Nightrose archetype. So without any further ado, we've got a lot of interesting new cards to tackle. So we're gonna jump straight into the set review and see all the new cards for Granblue. And of course, we're gonna start off with the reprints and all the generic trigger stuff. And they got one reprint trigger, and that's of course going to be a 1-star, as it's just a generic reprint. Now on top of that, they also got a new heal trigger, which is Good Luck Charm Banshee, but this is just a new heal trigger without any other thing, so it's going to be a 1-star, as we already got a heal trigger in Granblue. Granblue also got a new draw trigger, which is Gunner Franchette, and this is going to be a 3-star for me, as it's a new trigger that can still be run and changes up for deck building in the trigger lineup. And then the final new trigger that Granblue got in this set is the new Critical Sentinel trigger in the likes of Rampage Shade. And of course, just like the other Critical Sentinels, this is gonna be a 5-star for me, as it opens up a lot of options in deck building space, as we got a new Sentinel, as well as a new trigger, as well as a new critical trigger. Now of course, with Nightrose we need Grenache as a starter, so the brand new starter that we've got in this set is Undying Departed Grenache, but it's gonna be a 1-star, as unlike the original Grenache, this doesn't really do anything new. It's just a palette swap of just any generic starter. So sadly, Grenache, you've got downgraded quite heavily. Now Granblue also got a new type of vanilla, and this time they've got a 9k grade 1 vanilla with 0 shield in the likes of Night Playing Zombie. Well, this one isn't gonna play any kind of tune anytime soon, as it's a 1-star, as it probably will never be played unless you're maybe into Zazan Premium Granblue, but we're not gonna talk about that on this channel. With those cards out of the way, let's talk about actual skilled cards, and we're gonna dive into some generic cards. And the first one that I want to highlight is this peculiar grade 1, which is Skeleton Sea Navigator. And its abilities: act on rearguard circle, cost, rest 2 rearguards, and put 5 cards from the top of your deck into your drop zone. So this can rest itself plus another unit, or just 2 different units, but you ideally want to rest himself, as he's just a 7k body, to fill your drop zone with 5 cards. This might sound bad, as you're limiting your offensive capabilities, and just blindly milling 5 cards might not help you as much, and it could potentially have an issue with deck out. But this card is surprisingly powerful, and is therefore a 3-star card in my opinion. The reason for that is that this card in the early game can set up your drop zone in a rapid pace, as just resolving this on your first turn, and then on your second turn you already have 10 cards in your drop zone. 10 cards is very important, because a lot of powerful cards require 10 cards or more in drop zone to get their full effect. And we're gonna see a couple of cards in this set that follow suit, but we also have older cards like Greed Shade that get significantly more powerful if the drop zone is sizably filled. So this actually helps you with that game plan. And as we're gonna see with the new VR Nightrose, that card relies on a healthy drop zone, but doesn't help you to fill that drop zone in any capacity. So having a grade 1 like this that can turbo fill that drop zone no matter what's gonna be put into the drop zone can actually be more beneficial than you think in a generic sense, with what the Granblue was with the likes of Baskirk and with Cocytus. So Skeleton Sea Navigator is definitely not a card you should be overlooking, as it can be a very powerful card in your engine. Now another card which we've seen many times before in the types of skill is this grade 1 Cyril the Ghosty, and Cyril has the ability continues on rearguard circle or guardian circle. If your drop zone has 15 or more cards, this unit gets power plus 10k and shield plus 10. So these types of skill aren't really that new. The only issue is that The condition is quite heavy. 15 cards is pretty late game. Even with this Skeleton Navigator, that's 3 turns you need to be waiting until you reach that 15 cards in drop zone. It can of course be a little bit faster with other cards, but waiting so long for just an 18k booster or attacker or potentially 20k shield is not good enough in my opinion, and therefore I can only give it a 2-star rating. The value wise is pretty significant, but the fact that it needs to wait so long and it also doesn't really do anything besides just being a beater or just a big beefy defender doesn't really help you all as much. Now another very interesting card that we have is this grade 2 ranking Frangini, and I think this is the Walmart version of Flanger, as its ability is Auto and Vanguard Circle. When placed from drop zone, cost Counterblast 2, and this unit gets power plus 25k until the end of turn. So this could be a whopping 34k beater without any other extra power. But the problem with this card is that not only does it cost 2 Counterblast, which is so wasteful in something like Granblue to just use 2 Counterblast to just gain a big power bump, whereas 2 Counterblast could be equivalent to resurrecting 2 units or maybe even 4 units, and it could also be used for multi-tags. But this card also needs to be superior card from the drop zone, so it probably is reliant on other cards to bring it out. So yeah, 1 star for me, as this is not good. Now another card that somewhat interacts with the drop zone is this grade 3 for both Ghost Ship. And its abilities act from drop zone, cost discard a card from your hand, call this card to the rearguard circle, and if your drop zone has 10 or more cards, so here we have that 10 mark threshold again, this unit gets power plus 10k until the end of turn. So you could replace any card from your hand and turn it into a 22k beater on the side column. It's alright, but the problem is it's on a grade 3. Yes, it has the protect marker, but you definitely do not want to ride this thing, as it's just a vanilla Vanguard. So for what it does, I can only give it 2 stars, as it might be interesting as a rearguard unit, as it can be a nice beater, but Granblue has so much more better beaters in grade 2s and even in grade 1s to some extent. And even if you want to go that route, Skull Dragon is way better than what this thing can ever be. So for that, I can only give it 2 stars, as it might be an interesting thing for budget players. Now, another really peculiar grade 3 is this shade, Parliament Shade, as its abilities Auto and Vanguard Circle. When it attacks, costs Soul Blast 3 grade 3s. This gives me some flashbacks to a certain Murakumo card. Retire all of your and your opponent's rear guards. If your drop zone has 15 or more cards, call 5 cards from your drop zone to the rearguard circle, and all of those units get 10k power until the end of turn. I'm gonna be very honest. This particular skill, if we just disregard the cost, is actually pretty decent, because you can fill your entire board, just attack with a bunch of stuff, and then all its things is gonna be retired, and you rebuild a brand new board, and everything gets plus 10k power. So that's plus 20k to the side columns. There's probably no reason to call something behind the Vanguard, unless Granblue gets access to a back row attacker, as seen as the Vanguard is already in attack step. But on the surface, that skill is actually pretty powerful. The only problem here is that this thing needs to Soul Blast 3 grade 3s. So that's way too slow, as there's no actual feasible way to achieve this in a quick fashion. So sadly, this card is going to be a 1 star for me, as I do not see a viable way to actually use this thing in a good competitive way. No way, sir. I mean, try it. Try to prove me wrong, but I don't think you're actually going to get something out of it. Now, another peculiar grade 3, and we got a couple of those in this set for Granblue, is this Skeleton Pirate Skipper. And Skipper has the ability Act on Vanguard Circle. Once per turn, cost Counterblast 1, and put 2 cards from the top of your deck into the drop zone. Call up to 1 card from the drop zone to the rearguard circle, and that unit and this unit get power plus 10k until the end of turn. So this is basically a way to resurrect a card to the field every single turn. It's a budget form of Beskirk to some extent, or even Cocytus, but Cocytus can give you way more value. But it's basically what it is. It's a budget variant of those cards. You're not going to play this in a competitive environment, as it's a Vanguard Circle skill, and there are way better Vanguard units, but it's purely for budget options. And even in that extent, Probably it's not going to be run as 7Cs as your budget deck, and probably 7Cs can do better than what this card can provide. But if you do not like the 7Cs engine, then you can go with Skipper and play a budget variant of what Beskar did way at the beginning of the reboot. So at least that's that. So for that, I will give it 2 stars. This is not outright bad, but there are way better options out there. Now, the last generic card that I wanted to highlight is, of course, the generic Grade 3 Searcher. And for Nightrose, or just for Granblue in particular, that's, of course, Tommy the Ghosty Brothers. And their unique way to gain the 5k power is continuous Vanguard to Vanguard Circle. During your turn, if your drop zone has 5 or more cards, this unit gets power plus 5k. So that's actually pretty easy to fulfill, especially if you use something like Skeleton Navigator, as that means you can immediately fulfill a condition on the first turn. So it's a pretty decent 30k booster in almost every situation of the game, so that's pretty nice. And of course, it has the generic Grade 3 Search skill, which is auto Vanguard Regular Circle. When you play for a moment, look at 5 cards, top of the deck, reveal them, give you one, and put them in your hand, shuffle the deck, and put a card, discard a card from your hand. Yeah. It's an obvious 5-star card, and you're going to be running a lot of decks no matter what you want to play, as it's just really good. Now, with those generic cards out of the way, let's take a look at the new 7C's budget archetype, which is pretty interesting as it also includes a brand new mechanic for the clan and also for Vanguard in general. So we're going to start off from the lowest grade all the way up to their boss monster, and the first one that we're going to tackle is a brand new grade 0, which isn't the starter, which is 7C's Apprentice Nightrunner. Now, his first ability, and this is an ability shared among all the 7C's units, is Auto and Vanguard and Rearguard Circle. When its attack hits, choose one of your Vanguard circles or Rearguard circles without any treasure markers and put a treasure marker. So if any of your 7C's units hits a Vanguard or a Rearguard, it doesn't matter what they hit, you can create a treasure marker. And these treasure markers, you just put them underneath the circles, and they don't really do anything by themselves, but certain 7C's cards will interact with those markers, as you're going to see with a couple of these skills. Now, every time you create a marker, that circle can no longer get a treasure marker. So you can have a maximum of 6 markers, 1 for each rearguard circle and 1 on your vanguard circle. Once you have 6, you're basically done, as you don't need to create more, as you cannot create more. And as you're going to see with their main boss unit, that is Night Mist, you don't need more than 6. So what is Nightrunner's unique ability to this? That is, of course, act on rearguard circle, cast bind this unit, and put 2 cards from your top of your deck into the drop zone and return a card with 7C's in its card name, not named 7C's Apprentice Nightrunner, from your drop zone to your hand. So what this card basically allows you to do is to fill your drop zone a little bit, but more importantly, it can trade itself with another card in your drop zone from the 7C's archetype back to your hand. And the reason why that's handy is because one of the 7C's cards has an on-place effect, so you can then reload that on-place effect thanks to Nightrunner. So that's the idea behind this card, and in the worst case scenario, it can replace itself with at least a grade 1, which can make better numbers. So 7C's Nightrunner is just a card that ups the consistency of the engine. And as for that, I think it's a 2-star card. You might say, why not a 3-star card? Well, it's not the greatest cards within the 7C's engine, and even the 7C's engine as a total package is not the strongest decks out there. So with that all considered, if it's just for that archetype and it's not the strongest card even within that archetype, I cannot give it a 3-star rating, so that's why it's a 2-star card for me. Now, if we go into the grade 1 lineup, we have this grade 1 Witch Doctor of 7C's Raised Tutor. It has, of course, the on-hit effect, but its unique ability is continuous rearguard circle. If there is a marker on this unit circle, this unit gets intercept. So if there's a treasure marker underneath this unit, you can use it as a 10k interceptor on the front row. And as we're going to see with Night Mist, it can also potentially intercept from the back row. So this is a 10k interceptor, which is really nice. But the way how this worded is that it just asks for a marker, not particularly a treasure marker. Meaning if you play Protect 2, it can also synergize with a Protect 2 marker, making it potentially into a 20k interceptor if it's on a Protect 2 circle. So it's basically a different way to get some extra shield value. It doesn't really help your engine whatsoever, it's just extra shield value, so for that, I can only give it a 2-star, as you're mainly gonna play it because it has the on-hit effect and it's a 7C's unit, and there are no better options. So that's why I can only give it a 2-star rating for what it is. Now we're gonna get into an actual really good 7C's grade 1 unit, as here we have 7C's Helmsman Night Crow. And of course it has the on-hit effect, but its unique ability is Act from Drop Zone. If you have a Vanguard with 7C's in its card name, cost Soul Blast 1 and retire a rearguard not named 7C Helmsman Nightcrow and call this card to rearguard circle. So this card allows you to turn any unit onto the field into this unit, and you don't have to call it to the same circle, but that's what's gonna happen in most scenarios. So what's ideal about this card is that not only does it Soul Blast, so you can get your right target into the drop zone to potentially call it from the drop zone, but it allows you to play non-7Cs cards into the deck, as you can therefore then replace those units whenever you want into a Nightcrow. So let's say, for example, you play a Greed Shade because Greed Shade is that good of a card, and you have it onto the board. The issue is that all your 7Cs cards have unhit abilities, which your opponent doesn't want to go through, but that Greed Shade doesn't. So they will allow that Greed Shade to hit, as it doesn't advance your game plan. Now, thanks to Nightcrow, you can replace that Greed Shade with a Nightcrow, so suddenly they don't have any attack they can just easily take. So that's the power potential of Nightcrow within 7Cs, as it allows you to play outside Archetype cards into the deck without actually sacrificing consistency for your engine. So for that, I think Nightcrow is a solid 3-star card, as it helps you to give more plays and options and potential to the archetype as a whole, but isn't strong enough for itself to carry the archetype as much as you want it to. Now, that is also the final grade 1 within this archetype, so let's move towards the grade 2s. And the first one we see is 7C's Pillager Night Spinel. And of course, it has the unhit ability, but its unique ability is something similar to Night Runner, as her unique effect is auto Vanguard to rearguard circle. When placed, cost counterless 1, and put 2 cards from the top of your deck into the drop zone, and call up to 1 card with 7Cs in its card name not named 7C's Pillager Night Spinel from your drop zone to the rearguard circle. So where Night Runner allows you to get it to hand for binding itself, this card has the unplaced condition to then call something from the drop zone directly to the field. So where you want to get this card into your hand with Night Runner, this card then allows you to call whatever 7Cs you want onto the field to populate the board. And this is much stronger than Night Runner, because Night Runner himself isn't directly a plus. You just swap those cards. But Night Spinel is a direct plus, as once you call this to the field, you get another unit onto the field. So that's actually really good if you want to swarm the board, and as soon as you can even use it as a Vanguard unit, means you can definitely put up pressure early on if you want to hit those treasure markers as consistent as possible and as fast as possible. So for what this card can provide for the deck, I think it's an obvious 4-star, as this definitely helps the deck to actually perform and do something. Because without Night Spinel, it's really hard to get the plus engine you need to keep the pressure on with your deck, because you need to have a full field as much as possible to actually do your plays, especially once we see the main Vanguard unit. Now there's one more grade 2 that we've got for the 7Cs, and that is 7C's Master Swordsman / Shade. And once again, it has the unhit ability, but it also has a unique ability which is continuous rearguard circle. During a turn, if there is a marker on this unit's circle, this unit gets power plus 15k. So this is just a massive beater you can generate. And just like we've seen with Raiden's Tutor, it doesn't really require to have the treasure marker. So you can also use Protect 2 to fulfill its condition. And with Protect 2, you get a plus 20k buff, making it a nice 29k beater. So it's just a high beater, which might not be good enough in general, but as soon as this engine revolves around hitting your opponent, then suddenly having a high beater sounds a lot more attractive, as it helps you to get actually those hits in. But as we're going to see with Night Mist, this is actually really important to keep the pressure on, even if your opponent gets something like defensive triggers. So for that, I think it's a solid 3-star card. It's not as powerful as Night Spinel, but it's definitely much better than the previous cards we discussed. Now, I've said the name many times before, but the other 7Cs, as all these cards are much better compared with Night Mist. So let's talk about their main grade 3 boss unit, which is of course Lord of the 7Cs, Night Mist. And it has the obvious on-hit ability, but its unique effect is continuous Vanguard circle. You get all the effects below according to the number of your treasure markers. 1 or more, all of your rearguards with 7Cs in their card names can attack and intercept from the back row. So this is what I meant with Raiden's Tutor, that it can potentially be a nice interceptor from the back row, but it also allows you to all the other cards like Shade that can be nice beaters to just hit. And this is what I mean, that suddenly now having a high number increase onto Shade is important, as you're not effectively boosting with your units, but you're just attacking with all your units separately, so you have 5 attacks. But keep in mind, it just states that they can intercept from the back row, but it doesn't mean that they can just outright intercept without having the intercept ability. So grade 1s without the intercept ability can't intercept unless they have the intercept ability. So Rain Tutor is the only grade 1 within the 7C's archetype that can actually effectively intercept from the back row. So keep that in mind. Now the next step is 3 or more treasure markers, and if we fulfill that, we get, during your turn, all of your units with 7C's in your card name get power plus 5k. So not only can we attack with all our units separately, now they also gain an extra 5k. This is really good, because as I stated, you're probably going to attack with every single unit, even your grade 1s. But grade 1s cannot effectively hit anything besides other grade 1s. Now with this 5k power increase means they will turn into 13k units. And now we have a bunch of 13k, 14k, and Slash Shade is then a 29k or 34k. And this is where the thing comes in play where I said about defensive triggers, because now we have multiple attacks, but the one defensive trigger will stop most of those attacks. This is where Slash Shade suddenly becomes very powerful, as it can easily overcome 1 or 2 defensive triggers, which is really good. But this aspect becomes even more impactful once we look at the third effect, because if we have 6 or more treasures, this unit gets Auto and Vanguard Circle. At the end of the battle it attacked, stand all of your rearguards with 7Cs in their card names. So if you have an entire field filled with treasure markers, your Vanguards can restand your entire board. So effectively, you can have 5 rearguard attacks, then your Vanguard attacks, and then once again 5 rearguard attacks. So for a whopping 11 attacks, which doesn't cost you any resource, mind you, this is incredibly powerful. But as I stated before, most of our attacks will be stopped by 1 defensive trigger, as most of our grade 2s and grade 1s are just 13 to 14k. Even our Vanguard is just a 12k unit on its own. Unless we have, of course, the plus 5k power, so it's 17. But still, 1 defensive trigger will stop all those attacks, unless you have multiple Slash Shades onto the board. Now, there is something interesting that comes into play with Night Mist, as the 6 or more treasure marker skill itself states that at the end of the battle, so if you have 5 treasure markers and Night Mist hits, you still gain that treasure marker in time to then activate this ability that you will gain once you have 6 markers. So keep in mind, if you're playing 7Cs or you're facing against 7Cs, if their Vanguard attacks and they have 5 markers and they have a full field, never let the Vanguard hit, because if you let that Vanguard hit, their entire board will restand. And if you have no defensive triggers or you're sitting on 5 damage, you probably will lose. So with everything in consideration and the entire package evaluated, I think Night Mist is a solid 4-star card. This card alone carries the entire 7C's archetype. If this card wasn't there, the 7C's budget archetype was nowhere near as playable as it is right now. So this card hard carries the deck and gives the deck actually some playstyle and playability, as it's a really powerful card. But there are definitely some issues with it, as you can easily play against it if you're playing a powerful enough deck that can just keep guarding every single attack. Now with the 7C's archetype discussed, we're going to take a look at Nightrose and the main generic support cards that somewhat interact with Nightrose to some extent, as these cards are still generic, as most Granblue cards are generic, but they definitely have an interaction aspect with Nightrose herself. So first, let's take a look at the princess herself to have a better understanding of what we're working with. So here's the new VR Vampire Princess of Nightfog, Nightrose. And her abilities are Auto and Vanguard Circle. When your rearguard attacks or boost, that unit gets power plus 5k until the end of the battle, and retire that unit at the end of the battle. So this gives any rearguard a passive plus 5k power, but you're then forced to retire it. And this skill is mandatory. So whenever you boost or attack with a unit, you have to give them the 5k power and you have to retire them at the end of the battle. Now this can give any unit plus 5k or an entire column plus 10k, which can help you to actually achieve some nice beefy numbers, especially on your first grade 3 turn when something like a Skull Dragon might not be as strong as it can be in the late game. So this is really nice to that extent, but can be annoying if you do not have a good enough plus engine. With some cards, this can actually be really good, because cards like Skull Dragon or Ghost Ship, they will retire themselves anyway, so you're not losing any value in combination with this skill, and you actually make them more powerful, which is pretty nice. And some other cards that you rather want to have in the drop zone, like Necrobone we're going to look at, or Dancing Cutlass that can then counter charge, can actually help you set up for more plays later down the line. So there's definitely some aspect that's positive and negative to this skill, which you should be aware of when playing with Nightrose. But the main aspect of this card comes from her second ability, which is Auto and Vanguard Circle. When it attacks, cost Counterblast 1, choose a column, Call the 2 cards from the drop zone to the rearguard circle in that column, and if your opponent's Vanguard is grade 3 or greater, this unit gets power plus 10k until the end of the battle. So not only can you beef up your numbers from your rearguards, you can also gain an extra attack for an entire column for 1 counterblast. So you call in a grade 2 or grade 3 with a grade 1 booster behind it, and then once they attack, they also get again the plus 5k power buff, which then will then force them to retire anyways. And if your opponent is on grade 3, then your Vanguard hits for a beefy 22k unit, and maybe you have a strong booster behind it, so you're probably reaching over the 33k threshold. So all of the things considered, this allows Nightrose to hit for high numbers on all her attacks, and you can at least achieve 4 attacks. And combined with other cards like maybe a Ghost Ship, you can actually get a decent draw engine off, as you can get a Ghost Ship onto the field, you attack with it, it retires itself at the end of the battle, you draw a card, then use Nightrose's skill to recall the Ghost Ship with a booster, and again it retires itself, you draw a card, so you get more card draw in one single turn, even when that wasn't possible beforehand. So Nightrose has a lot of options with the already existing card pool, but once we're going to look at the other cards that we're going to discuss right now, you will see that Nightrose is a lot better with even more crazier things you can do. And the first card we're going to talk about, I just teased a little bit about it, is this grade 1 Witch Doctor of Powder Bone, Necro Bone. And I stated that you want to have this card in the drop zone, and that's because of its effect, which is act in drop zone, cost, discard a card from your hand, and put this card on the bottom of your deck, and call a grade 1 from your drop zone to the rearguard circle. If your drop zone has 10 or more cards, you may call any grade instead. So this card allows you to trade any card from your hand with any card from the drop zone to then recall to the field. This is incredibly powerful, as it allows you to get access to cards like Ghost Ship and Skull Dragon, which you cannot call from your hand on a consistent basis, and set them up for powerful plays. That, in combination with what we've seen with Nightrose, can actually help you to do that play that I just described with having a Ghost Ship onto the field, it kills itself, draw a card, and recall it with Nightrose, and kills itself and draw a card once again. Now, in the late game, you can do that with a Skull Dragon to have a very powerful Skull Dragon active. So you have those powerful options. But there's even more that this card can provide you, as this card puts itself back to the bottom of the deck. Because it puts itself back to the bottom of the deck means that deck out becomes less of an inherent issue if you can resolve multiple Necro Bones. Because if you run 3 or 4 copies of this thing and you can resolve the skill 4 times, you have 4 copies to the bottom of your deck. You might think to yourself, well, that doesn't help you as much, because what are 4 cards if you start milling like 6 to 7 cards in one turn, or a lot of over the course of the game? Well, some cards, and especially a card that we're going to talk about very soon, allows you to selectively mill something and shuffle your deck. So even if you have them all on the bottom of the deck, at some point you can shuffle your deck, and there's a higher chance you will mill them sooner and then use their skill again. And every time you use a Necrobone, you effectively put your deck count up to 1. And if you do that like 6, 7, 8 times in a game, then suddenly that's a big sizable chunk you added to your deck, which can help you to combat those deck out scenarios. But another interesting thing about this card is that if you combine this with Greed Shade, you basically have complete access to your drop zone. Greed Shade allows you to get any card from the drop zone into your hand to then maybe use on place effect, and Necrobone allows you to get access to cards from your drop zone and immediately call to the field, even if they couldn't be called to the field like Ghost Ship or Skull Dragon. So Necrobone is an incredibly powerful card that can be used in the Nightrose engine, but also outside of the Nightrose engine in whatever deck you might come up with. So Necrobone is an obvious 5-star card for me, as it's an incredibly powerful tool to any Granblue player out there. So definitely try looking into this card, what you can do with it. Now, a grade 2 card that is probably very much built for Nightrose is this grade 2 Thin Mist Banshee. And before we go into the skill, I'm not gonna straight say it up front. This is a Walmart budget version of Ghost Ship. It's basically what Ghost Ship does, but worse and more restrictive to some extent. And I'm only gonna give it 3 stars, as it's an okay card for what it is. And the reason why I said it before is because you will immediately see it as you look at the skills, as her skills auto rearguard circle. When placed by a card's ability, this unit gets power plus 10k until the end of turn. Ghost Ship cannot be called from hand, so it needs to be called via a skill, just like this card. But Ghost Ship gains 15k. So this is already weaker than Ghost Ship, just on flat power level. Then her second ability is auto. When retired from the rearguard circle by a card's ability, draw a card, this ability may only be used by a card with the same card name once a turn. So Ghost Ship not only gains 5k power more, but it will draw you cards just by its own effect. You're not reliant on another effect. This card completely is reliant on Nightrose, as it needs to be retired by Nightrose's passive ability. But also, on top of that, this is a hard once per turn. So you cannot even abuse this card like you can do with Ghost Ship, as I explained with the Ghost Ship combo, that you can call Ghost Ship, get the draw, recall it with Nightrose, get another draw. You cannot do this with this grade 2. So it's even more restrictive. The only positive side to this card over Ghost Ship is that you can call this card from your hand, no problem. But as we just discussed with Necrobone, that's no issue anymore, as you have complete access to Ghost Ship whenever you want. So Finmiss Banshee is just a budget version for what she is. It's still an okay tool to play with, but it's nothing in comparison to Ghost Ship. So that's why it's a 3-star maximum for me. Now, another grade 2 which is interesting to some extent and might be really relevant in premium, but I'm gonna mainly judge this thing for what it can do in standard, as we have this grade 2 Witch Doctor of Vanguard, Necrolacy. And Necrolacy has the ability on Vanguard the Rearguard Circle. When placed, you may call a grade 0 from a drop zone to the Rearguard Circle. So it's a free plus. You get whatever grade 0 you can call. Now, in standard, that's either triggers, your generic starter, or you play 7Cs and you can call Night Runner. So that already can tell you that this might be 7C support. And yes, that can be the case. But you can also combine this to some extent with Nightrose, because you can superior call a column with Nightrose, which can be this grade 2 and whatever grade 1 behind it. Then you activate Necrolacy's ability to then superior call grade 0 to the other column. Now with Nightrose's ability, that grade 0 will gain an additional 5k power, so it most definitely will be a 10k attacker. So if you do that, that allows you to gain 5 attacks, and it doesn't cost any extra resources to perform that, as Necrolacy can freely call that card. The only problem is that is a 10k unit which cannot hit anything besides rear guards, and you're reliant on triggers to actually make it more decent. So it's not ideal in that scenario as well. Maybe in premium there are some applications with powerful grade 0 triggers that actually can be a vital aspect to your combo, but I'm not aware of anything that makes this card any better for what it is. So for what it can do and what we've seen, I can only give it a 2-star rating. It might become incredibly powerful later if we actually get more grade 0s with skills, but so far Granblue doesn't really have those. So sadly, it's not that good. And yes, I'm aware Granblue has the old Grenache that can countercharge too, but again, I'm gonna mainly judge this card for what it can do in standard. Now, the final card before we go back into Nightrose is an immensely powerful card. This card is basically the Greed Shade of 2020, as here we have a brand new grade 2 triple R Pirate Swordsman Columbard. And Columbard has the ability on Vanguard the Rearguard Circle. When placed, cost counterblast 1. Search your deck for up to 1 card, put it into your drop zone, shuffle your deck, and call up to 1 card from your drop zone to the Rearguard Circle. This ability may only be used by a card with the same card name once a turn. So hard once per turn restriction on an effect that allows us to selectively mill a card and then resurrect a card from a drop zone. What's incredibly powerful about this card is that it allows us to basically superior call any cards from our deck if we want to, aka Ghost Ship or Skull Dragon or whatever, but it can also be used to just selectively mill a card to set up a play, maybe a Cutlass to countercharge, maybe a Necrobone or something else, and then superior call something else that's already in the drop zone. So we don't necessarily have to mill the card that we want to superior call, which makes this card super flexible and incredibly powerful in all kinds of scenarios. So this card as a Vanguard unit or Rearguard unit in the early game can be utilized to be very aggressive. You can immediately start swinging with strong attackers on your turn 2 plays, which can be good, but that's not even close where the power potential stops for this card, because as I already explained, you can use this with something like a Necrobone. Necrobone, I already explained, it's going to help you to up the deck count for what it is, and if you have multiple Necrobones at the bottom of your deck, you can resolve a Columbard, get that Necrobone, one of those copies, back into the drop zone, you shuffle your deck, so the other Necrobone can go to the top again, and you can utilize that Necrobone again, so that it allows you to do all those plays over and over and over again. Now, Columbard also has a nice application with Nightrose or whatever other card that might potentially allow you to superior call unit mid-battle. Because what you can do with this card is that if you utilize Nightrose multi-tech skill to then select a column and call 2 units, one of those units can be a Columbard, and so you call Columbard to the front row, a grade 1 to the back row, and then you utilize Columbard skill to then mill another card, and then get a strong attacker like a Ghost Ship or a Skull Dragon to the side column and have another attacker ready. And this allows you to then get 5 attacks, which are actually significant, unlike Necrolacy that does that with a grade 0. This allows you to get a strong grade 2 or grade 3 beater and have actually significant 5 attacks a turn with Nightrose, which is incredibly powerful. And there's one more thing this card allows you to do in standard, as in premium you can do all kinds of crazy shenanigans with this thing, but you can do a 1000 IQ play with this thing with Nightrose multi-tech skill. And this is something you do at the late game. If you're almost done, your entire drop zone is filled with 30 cards or something, your opponent's at 4 or 5 damage, you want to close the game, you use Necrobone to call multiple Skull Dragons to the field, attack with those Skull Dragons, then attack with Nightrose. You use Nightrose's ability to select a column, you call a Skull Dragon in the front row, and you call a Columbard in the back row. Columbard isn't here to attack or boost. This Columbard is then used to use its skill to then get another Skull Dragon back to the other side of the field and have once again 2 standing Skull Dragons. So by doing this play, you have 2 Skull Dragons, 1 Vanguard swing, and again 2 Skull Dragon swings. That's good enough to close any game, as those Skull Dragons will probably hit for around 60 to 70 to 80k, which are pretty powerful, and not a lot of decks can compete with that. So this is what Columbard can do just today with this set. Who knows how powerful this card is going to be, as this is just like Necrobone and Greedshade. It's super consistent, but it's also super generic, which means it will evolve with the deck. Which is insane that Granblue is getting these pieces set after set after set. So obviously, this card is an obvious 5-star. No questions asked. You cannot argue with that one. And if you are, fight me in the comments. You're wrong. But with that said, let's go back to Nightrose, as now we have seen all the combo cards and all the pieces that we've seen. So let's talk about Nightrose once again. I think it's pretty obvious that Nightrose is a 5-star card. I mean, it allows you to get BV numbers onto the board. It allows you to multi-tag in a Protect deck, which is what Nightrose already did. But now with Granblue having access to cards like Skull Dragon, Greedshade, now Columbard, as well as Necrobone, all these crazy cards, it's insanely powerful. But even if you're not looking at these cards, you can even look at the older cards like Ghost Ship and Skull Dragon, and even Cutlass. Cutlass was somewhat of an awkward card. Yes, it gave you counter charge, but the issue is once you call one of those copies to the field, you want to get that other copy back into the drop zone to get more counter charge. The only issue is to get that, you are needing to forcefully call on top of that Cutlass. You don't really want to do that, as you're minusing yourself for only a counter charge. You much rather get value out of that Cutlass. Now with Nightrose, you actually get decent value, because now it becomes an 11k booster or attacker, and behind Nightrose herself, that's actually making magic numbers, as an 11k booster on a 22 or 12k Vanguard makes 23 or 33, which hits magic numbers against force. So Nightrose, an obvious 5-star card, it's an incredibly powerful card, and most likely will be run for the long haul for Granblue. And with that, we basically conclude this set review for Granblue. As we've seen, Granblue once again got some amazing new generic support cards, as they always do in every single set, and I think this is going to be a trend for the long run here for the clan, as it's a more generic type clan without a lot of archetypes. But with that said, we do have a brand new archetype in the likes of 7 Seas, which is actually really interesting as a budget deck, as it has a very unique playstyle, which makes it stand out to the rest of what Granblue already does, which in itself is what archetypes should be. They should be fresh and interesting enough to stand out from what the rest of the clan already is doing, without deviating too much of the clans. Otherwise, you're asking yourself, is it even in the same clan, or what is it doing right here? So basically, overall, Granblue got an amazing new support set in V-BT09, Butterfly the Moonlight. And with that, I want to know what you guys think of this new set. Do you think that Granblue got shafted. I honestly think that nobody is thinking that, but I want to know, what's your favorite card? What's your favorite new addition to your playstyle? Are you very happy with the 7 Seas archetype? Are you happy with something like Columbard or Necrobone? Was that the missing piece to your personal deck or your engine? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments down below of what you think of these new Granblue cards for Nightrose or 7 Seas, or basically Butterfly, the Moonlight. As always, this video has been brought to you by our lovely patrons over at patreon.com/VanguardInsider. You guys are amazing. If you do want to support the channel or everything that's happening on the channel, you can simply go to patreon.com/VanguardInsider and become a patron today. But with that said, I'm Mr. Time Leap, and I see you guys in the next one.